With MailChimp, you get a whole lot more than a URL. You get an all-in-one marketing platform to help drive sales. That means you can connect your data to make more informed, smarter decisions, and you get powerful automation tools like our Customer Journey Builder to ensure you never miss an opportunity to turn shoppers into loyal customers. So if you're ready to integrate your marketing and boost sales, get started today at MailChimp.com/smartmarketing. MailChimp, built for growing businesses.
You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/intotheportal. Across the British Isles, there exist thousands of ancient megaliths, structures of mysterious origins, whose presence in the landscape continues to fascinate the world to this day, as the true use of many of these ritualistic sites is unknown. Resting in a picturesque meadow between the English counties of Oxfordshire and Warwickshire lie a series of ancient and mysterious stones. Some shaping a massive circle, others situated in various spots dotted across the landscape. Their presence provokes intrigue and awe, but who exactly placed them there is a mystery, as is their purpose in the ancient society that constructed them. Indeed, it is believed the stones hold ancient secrets and immense powers undefined by modern research. These are the Rollright Stones. The mysterious nature of these stone megaliths have inspired many myths and legends, and centuries of stories associated with their existence, some of which center around a frightening and powerful witch, who quite possibly could be responsible for the stone's presence in the landscape. Join us on Into the Portal as we explore the fascinating legends of the Rollright Stones.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amber Ray.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
Welcome back into the portal, your gateway to the bizarre.
Yes, indeed. Welcome back, everyone. Slightly late on this episode, but I think it's going to be well worth the wait because it's a topic we're both really excited about, and we're heading back over to the UK for some High Strangeness after our little quick stint in Scotland right before Christmas this past year. And if you haven't listened to our episode on the fairy coffins, definitely go check it out. But today, and you know what? I'm just going to jump right into this, I think, hey? And that's what I typed at the top. We had a little chuckle about it before we recorded, but you know what? I think we are just going to jump right in.
Let's do it.
So like I said, we're heading to the central United Kingdom today, and we're kind of dealing with a few different angles of high strangeness, I would say. We're dealing with both the mystery of the Rollright Stones, as well as the legend of the Rollright Witch, and a few other interest pieces that are attached to both of those things as well. Because resting in the picturesque meadow, I should say, between the English counties of Oxfordshire and Warwickshire, and that's the best I can do with that, lie a series of ancient and mysterious stones, some shaping a massive circle, which is my favorite of all of these monuments, and I can't wait to get into it. Others are situated in various other spots across the neighboring landscape. They are all very strange. They're breathtaking, depending on who you're talking to. But exactly who placed them there is indeed a mystery. And it's believed that they hold both ancient secrets and immense powers within them, as well as some other aspects of strange phenomena that really are bizarre. So these are the Rollright Stones. And some of these monuments are even older than that of Stonehenge. They date back as far as 5,000 years, possibly even further than that. So they're, older than most of like the pyramids in Egypt and things like that. Like they predate some of the most famous monuments that we can think of that are extremely old. The name Rollright itself, just to kind of paint a little bit more of a picture historically for you guys here, derives from an Old English term. I'll try my best here. Horola Lundrick, something along those lines, which essentially just means land of Horola, which is an association with farming the land. So because it was always, that's how it was used throughout history. It was keeping these Neolithic peoples alive, but possibly meaning a little more than that, like the land itself as living in and of itself, which of course it is, it grows things, but maybe getting a little bit more literal interpretations of that as well.
You're talking like the land itself possesses energies and things like that can be harnessed.
Exactly.
And perhaps these arrangements are ways of connecting with that.
Yes. And of course, that's the bread and butter of Into the Portal. So yeah, this Old English term, Old English is the earliest historical form of the English language, obviously, Old English, brought over by the Anglo-Saxons. So it's like the name Rollright is a much more modern interpretation, right? Like this was not what ancient peoples were calling this place, because today we are going back much, much further than the time of the Anglo-Saxons. Now, these prehistoric monuments are located next to an ancient ridgeway known as Jurassic Way. What an awesome freaking name that is.
Yeah.
Which is essentially a ridgeway that is a long-distance footpath, an ancient footpath that extends roughly 88 miles or 142 kilometers roughly. But it actually probably extended much, much further in ancient times, which is just kind of interesting, right? It sort of shows how diverse the landscape might have been, where people were going, but we don't really know. It's just so freaking old.
Yeah, it is interesting to think it was that these monuments are located next to this. So if you think about it, like it was like I like to think of it as an ancient thoroughfare.
Yes.
People were coming and going. It was a way of getting around. So it's interesting to think, like, I'm always picturing it from like a bird's eye perspective, where it's like it's just been carved into the landscape because it's been used for so many centuries and thousands of years.
And when we get to the story of the witch, perhaps this was the path taken by the king.
Maybe.
We haven't quite got to that yet. The landscape, getting back to the monuments, consists of three main elements, or of these ancient structures, if you will. There are various legends that have arisen over the centuries about each individual Neolithic site, and not just these ones at Rollright, but across the UK and Europe in general. But the Rollright Stones have been associated from everything from ancient kings to harvesting Earth's energy, and even witchcraft, like we just said. And all of this is going to be coming in a hot sec, but first we wanted to take a look at each site so we know what we're talking about. So let's take a little trip over to Middle England, because all of these monuments are unique and mysterious, but we're going to start off with the Whispering Knights.
The Whispering Knights. What a funny name, hey?
Yeah.
And this particular feature is thought to be the remains of an ancient burial chamber that would have dated to around the mid to late Neolithic era.
Yes.
And it's considered one of these dolmens, or a portal dolmen, as another another sort of way of referring to it. But this is estimated to be freaking old, man. Like, this is about 3,800 to 3,000 BCE. So, or even older. That's kind of the approximation there. So we're talking about 1,000 years before Stonehenge.
Right.
So very old, very strange.
Yes.
And it is the remains. So it's kind of funny because when you look at this particular monument, it does kind of give that impression of a bunch of like figures leaning in together and almost like cavorting, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like, plotting.
Exactly.
Which does play into the legend that we'll mention here. But before we do, let's just address what is a dolmen,
Sure.
right? Because I think we've mentioned them before in previous episodes, but it's actually, so what it is a structure from a megalithic structure dating to the Neolithic era. Oh my gosh, that's a mouthful.
That's a lot of lithics.
Megalithic, Neolithic,
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. But it's typically formed by a couple of stones. So there would be two like upright stones, so vertically oriented, with a larger horizontal stone slab kind of resting on top.
Sure.
if you want to refer to it, this is a very crude way, but it almost looks like Fred Flintstone's
I
house.
knew you were going to say that, but it is very true.
It is. And there are some of the oldest examples found in Brittany, also in northern France too. And these can date to around the 5th millennia BCE.
It's old, man.
Incredibly old. And they are present in other parts of the world as well. And they did have different functions depending on where they were in the world. So you can find them in places like northern Africa, Asia, the Middle East. And a lot of people will refer to these as kind of like a burial chamber of sorts, or as a site where ancient worships or rituals would have taken place.
Right.
Anything from like, worshipping the fertility goddesses to perhaps aiding the transition of the dead into their next sort of state of being.
Literally.
Is another, yeah, exactly,
like,
right?
Messing with the body, like doing particular treatments to bodies and moving things in and out,
or
possibly.
even letting them lay there to rest to almost mummify in the elements a little bit. But another interpretation that was provided by BBC America kind of described dolmens, or alternatively cromlech, which is another term, I guess, as, quote, the most common form of megalithic structures in Europe. So again, they say here, it goes on to say, it's assumed to have been a kind of tomb or ceremonial place, somewhere to leave like human remains until only the skeletons remained. And then they were buried elsewhere is kind of what people think, because there's not a lot of bones that are usually found around these.
Hence the name, I guess, portal, depending on how you're interpreting that, because it is this transition point in that process of crossing to the afterlife or underworld, or whatever the interpretations of these ancient peoples may have been. We don't actually know fully, obviously, but very interesting. I
know, right? So this one in particular, the Whispering Knights Dolmen, is described as exactly that, one of the most ancient portal tombs. I love that, in all of Britain. Yeah. So again, love that name. We're into the portal here, so come on.
Of course.
This just works. But the chamber's purpose, again, like we were saying, they would have contained bones of leaders, important peoples, of all these individuals of the Neolithic era that would have settled along the ridge and the surrounding lands.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah, this is actually well before the Druids and other sorts of high strangeness that we've talked about before in the past on the show.
The Druids were drawn to these places. Like, they showed up and were like, oh my God. Like, that's why they were so attracted to Stonehenge and to Roll-Rite into these amazing places. It's crazy. Yeah,
exactly. So a lot of this idea of like how they were used and how they function in ancient societies is, a lot of it is conjecture, but people do think that there were the possibilities of multiple types of rituals happening at these sites. They could have been like a multi-purpose sort of like ritual site / burial site. I'm thinking, it's almost like it reminds me of Dwight, where he was like, oh yeah, like we get married. Our family tradition is get married in our coffins.
It's a real mixed bag that could have been going on at these sites. I don't
know, maybe.
But the interest piece too, before you continue on here, sorry to cut you off, is like the effort and extensive nature of like what these people went to create these things that would have been so ridiculously hard to make, even though they are like simple when you look at them. These stones are so freaking massive. And yeah, just the importance, like, I wish I could be a fly on the wall, right? Fly on the stone, I suppose you would say.
A fly on the stone.
Anyway, continue.
That sounds like a podcast name.
Ooh, maybe that's a history podcast for the network down the line.
And maybe it's like tales from like the tombstone, like the graveyard, where it's like fly on the tomb. He's just there, just watching.
Shout out to the Graveyard Tales boys there. We can team up with them for something like that.
Yeah.
A good name crossover.
Exactly. But okay, so going back to the Whispering Knights themselves, and this is a fairly, I would say, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like it's been broken down a little bit. It's been weathered. It doesn't actually have any horizontal like roof part anymore. It's more so just like a collection of stones.
Yeah, it doesn't look like all that much now, although it still does look like it's obviously was placed there.
It's intentionally placed, but yeah, exactly. It has been subject to a lot of weathering. So there's also 2 further monuments, right? So we've got the King's Men, which would be the next one we'll talk about, and that's a stone circle, which again, they're quite predominant on the Isle, and I think there's over 1,000 of them. Don't quote me on that, but I think there was like roughly that much, or more than that.
Like across the British Isles?
Across the British Isles, yeah. In different sizes and different, whatever. But this one actually is probably dating to about 2500 BCE. And it's interesting because the circle itself forms a kind of track, and it does attract people to this day, like, you know, local walkers and, you know, people that are just like, you know, looking to get out for a nice little meditation. And they do say, like, when we watched the Mystic Britain episode, Clive Anderson, one of the hosts, went there and he was interviewing some of the people that use the track regularly.
Yeah.
And they were saying how they do feel like they do get a connection. There's some sort of energy transference happening, or it's just like it's a very peaceful place for them. And he did actually do some interesting things with a dowser. A local dowser came and they were doing some things where they were picking up some strange energies.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting place. And it's believed that there are roughly 70 stones, but again, that goes into another legend where it's like it's actually been not proven to be impossible to count them, but it's pretty damn hard.
It's very hard.
And once you go around, you start to like second guess yourself and you start counting them more than once. I think the legend goes if you can count them 3 times and get the same number, then you'll get good luck or
yeah, and don't worry, I've got
on?
that. I want to discuss that in a little bit because there's a few other folkloric, I guess. What would you call that? Like they're not urban legends, like that's the classic thing. Go around 3 times and your wish shall be granted kind of thing. Anyway, there's a few different fun legends associated with them like that.
Well, there was this other guy, too, that we wanted to mention. A guy named William... Oh, my gosh, how do you say that?
William Stuckley. Yeah,
Stuckley.
Interesting fellow, this guy. You know, he was prominent in sort of this idea that these Neolithic sites were actually, like, significant. You know, people were... Like, especially in the Victorian era, they were interested in them, but not enough to care. They would chip off pieces and things like that as like little tokens and treasures and stuff, but they didn't really think much of what the ancient Britons that they originated from really were. So he made a big deal about this. He had an interesting quote here as well. I don't know if you wanted to read it.
Yeah, he did. He kind of described the stones as, quote, being corroded like worm-eaten wood by the harsh jaws of time. And they were said to make, quote, a very noble rustic sight and strike an odd terror upon the spectators and admiration at the design of them. That's the exact quote. Recently, actually, there was another woman, Aubrey Burrell, that called them 77 stones, stumps, and lumps of leprous limestone. Ooh. So they kind of appear almost like leprous figures.
Oh, they do.
They look very weathered. They look like
cursed men.
They kind of do, yeah. And then again, that does play into the legends that we're going to get into here. Before that we do, though, there was one other stone we wanted to mention called the Kingstone.
Yes.
So not the King's Men that we just said, but the Kingstone. And this is actually a solitary weathered monolith that is approximately dated to 1792 BCE.
Yes.
Not 91, 92.
92, baby.
92 was a good year. But the name, the Kingstone, according to, I would say maybe the official website for the Roll-Rite Stones.
Yeah, official, unofficial.
Official, unofficial. The name, the Kingstones, quote, may have originated, like some of the other standing stones of the same name, from its use to mark an important meeting place associated with an extensive Saxon cemetery in the vicinity. So interesting. Again, another transitionary area, you would say, hey?
Absolutely. And it just goes to show, again, like through the Bronze Age and then into the Iron Age, these ancient peoples were sticking close to these sites. So there's burial grounds from various different millennium nearby, and people were attracted to them. There's a reason. That's what's so cool about them. I have to go and put my hand on one of these stones very soon.
Yeah, totally. And a lot of people have, and they've also taken little parts of the stones. So it's kind of sad. So the actual shape of this stone is described as like a standing seal, like a seal balancing a ball on its nose.
It does look like that.
So it's kind of a weird, but honestly, it's because of all of the people over the centuries that have taken little tiny souvenirs.
Yep.
And also by, according to the local legend here, it was cattle drovers who would chip off small pieces that would act as lucky charms and keep the devil, quote unquote, at bay.
There you go. So and here we have the Christianization where it's like, okay, how weird is that? We've kind of brought up stuff like that in other episodes where it's like modern farmers chipping off something from an ancient megalith from a time that predates Christ by possibly 3,000 years or more, and it is using that as a charm to ward off the devil.
I know.
It's interesting.
It is, and is it more like that's just like a dumbed down version of like keeping like the evil powers, like, you know what I mean? Like something that's a little bit more pagan, but again, has been Christianized over the years. Yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, there's all these legends. So we should get into that because not only do these ancient monuments perhaps hold immense power, but they also have lots of secrets from a long forgotten past.
Oh, indeed they do.
And there might be some truth to some of them. And we're getting into all sorts of things. Witches, fairies, all that good stuff.
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's dive right into some early legends then. And, you know, even today there are, I guess we'd call them modern druids and practitioners of sort of different earth-based magics, you know, modern-day witches, Wiccans, that use this site, that continue to go there to this day to try to uncover these secrets. They're trying to tap into these things. And I know some people think that's very woo-woo, but I can appreciate trying to you know, be the fly on the stone in a way, like trying to. That's my new phrase of the episode here. There's even really cool thickets, actually, that people have put up now. So when you enter the site, it's like you're walking through entering sort of like a different world, right? It has this very atmospheric sort of sense of it, even though literally, you know, like the stone circle, the King's Men, is literally like right off of a highway. It's not like it's out in the complete middle of nowhere, you know what I mean? It's kind of strange, but energies have indeed been detected around the stones, particularly the circle of the King's Men. And you mentioned earlier, like, they used a dowsing rods in the Mystic Britain television series episode, which of course is not a scientific instrument, hasn't been proven that they're actually do anything really, but I'm air quoting proof because clearly there's something having to do with it, right? Like people do find things with it. So yeah, I'm a proponent of that. But the earliest legend that really ties into the name here, especially of the episode with the witch, the Rollright witch, it was first mentioned in the 1500s. This notion that perhaps the stones are that of petrified men. Who these men might be is a mystery. There's nothing specific in this first mention, but simply that they may be petrified men. And this was written in Cadman's Britannia. So this is written in Latin, 1586 CE is the date of its publication. And it states this is the quote, the translation: "The common people usually call them Rollright Stones, and that they were sometimes men by a wonderful metamorphosis, turned into hard stone." Sort of a rough translation from Latin there, but it's vague, but it's implying that something strange happened. You know, what does this mean? Like, what exactly happened here? And obviously the question being, could ancient soldiers have indeed been turned to stone? Which brings us to our next story. And we've only really dealt with this in terms of trolls and that sort of folklore and the idea of petrification. And we actually talked a little bit about the science of that, or quote unquote science of that, from our Troll Hunter episode, like calcified, right? Like having a different UV composition, right?
Light.
Anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Before I jump right into that though, I wanted to just do a really quick look at like what the hell was going on in Neolithic Britain when these were built, because if we're trying to decipher whether or not these could be petrified men based on a real story, I'm like, what the heck? But during this late Neolithic period, British society underwent massive changes. So between 3500 and around 3300 BCE, we've got prehistoric Britons that stopped their continual expansion and cultivation of wilderness. Instead, they started farming, right? And that's why Roll-Rite became such an important place.
Yeah.
The Orkney Islands as well, lots of different important sites up there, very similar, like farming was the thing. And they changed their religious beliefs in this time too. So the late Neolithic Britons were ceasing to construct the massive chambered tombs that we're talking about today.
Oh, okay, so the dolmens you're talking about.
Right, and they started to move into more of the stone circles using different forms of wood, different things like that. But the point is that they were people of the land, and they were very superstitious. They definitely thought that the land itself was alive beyond the sense that you can grow stuff in it. And that's why the UK is so rich with these stories of fairies and sprites and spirits of the land and things of that nature. Now, all of these changes in religion and subsistence living transitioned into tribal kingdoms throughout the centuries, which brings us back to the stones and the first story, if you will, or the most interesting one. So many centuries ago, when England was ruled by various tribes, there was an unnamed king who was allegedly attempting to become ruler of the entire land, taking over his neighboring clans. This is the most complete version that was published in Folklore. It was called Folklore in 1895 CE. And it goes as follows. As the king approached the hill, a witch appeared and stopped the king in his tracks by saying, quote, 7 long strides shalt thou take, and if Long Compton thou canst see, King of England thou shalt be. Realizing that the village would certainly be visible from the edge of the hill, the king strode forward, shouting, Stick, stock, stone, as King of England I shall be known. So, full of confidence, he strode forward to claim his prize, but he was caught off guard as a mound rose directly out of the ground in front of him, and the witch exclaimed, As Long Compton thou canst not see, King of England thou shan't not be. Rise up, stick, and stand still, stone, for King of England thou shalt be known. Thou and thy men hoar stones shall be, and I myself an elder tree. So, kind of a difficult to unpack there, but he did not meet her challenge in this story.
Well, he was tricked.
He was tricked. And, we can interpret that however we want. He
witch.
He walked up onto her territory. This was just some sort of a strange place that she was harvesting the energy of the Rollright Stones in the area, perhaps. But nevertheless, the result of this is that the king and his army were left as stone. The king became the lonely, solitary Kingstone that Amber mentioned, while the king's men were left in a stone circle, and the Whispering Knights, which were allegedly a separate group of knights that were being sent to stop the king and his men, were left plotting and whispering to each other about how they would meet their task.
I guess.
So this is
or were they plotting to overthrow him? Like, was that the whole thing?
Maybe some of his knights that had gone off, it was going to be like a coup.
I don't know.
A mutiny?
It kind of looks like it. Yeah, the whispering, I don't know. Maybe not, though. That's just my interpretation.
I don't know. I mean, this legend of the witch has definitely stuck with people.
Yeah. There's a long history of witchcraft and witches and that kind of folklore in the area of Long Compton in particular. But interestingly enough, though, it is continuous and it goes on. And there was actually a local artist named David Gosling who decided he would create a wooden sculpture that kind of spoke to this whole tradition of witches
really
in the area. And it's really neat. It's really effective. And it is spooky. Yeah, you're right, Andrew. It's actually made of the branches of Wellingtonia trees. Ooh. And it's like this really like cool, like rustic looking, they're all holding their willowy hands together, and it's really neat. It wasn't the most durable sculpture, though. Even though it was held together with wires, it only lasted about a year before it succumbed to, quote, the forces of nature. Or maybe the witch didn't want him around anymore.
Perhaps.
Do you feel as though there are things in your life holding you back, or that you could benefit from talking things out with a licensed professional counselor? BetterHelp.com is making it easier than ever to get on track with your mental health and connect with affordable therapists online from the convenience of your phone or laptop. BetterHelp.com is safe and private, allowing you to get help on your own time and at your own pace. You can schedule secure video or phone sessions, plus chat and text with your therapist. BetterHelp.com is available on multiple platforms and across the globe, so you have the help you need wherever you find yourself. They make it easy to assess your individual needs and match you with a licensed counselor wherever you are in the world. Just check out the testimonials posted daily on their site by people just like you. You can get started right away and begin communicating with a specialized counselor within 24 hours of signing up. This isn't your dog or your best friend. This is a licensed professional that will communicate with you via weekly scheduled video or phone sessions. And BetterHelp.com allows you to send a message anytime you need to, with timely and helpful responses in return. BetterHelp.com offers a secure, convenient way to access affordable online therapists from the comfort of your living room, office, or wherever you find yourself these days. Financial aid is available for those who qualify. So please, if you feel like you could benefit from this, check it out at BetterHelp.com. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com, and use discount code PORTAL, spelled PORTAL, to get 10% off your first month. Start living your best life and take charge of your mental health along with over 1 million other people. Again, that's BetterHelp.com with discount code PORTAL. So yeah, it is interesting how the figure of the witch actually figures quite prominently into the whole folklore tradition of the Long Compton area. And we have some interesting stories to get into here, but before we do, we just want to take a quick break and thank our latest supporters and Patreon members who have joined the crew over the last month and a bit here.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of awesome new folks around, and I'm just so amazed.
Yeah.
The support is incredible.
Absolutely.
We've got, let's just list them off here. We've got Dresden, 4077, got Jeffrey Watts, Kobe Jones, Mike Foster, Dan Crema, Carson Raycraft, Lori Alexander, Scott Barber, Mike Doreen, and also our newest producer, Kitsune.
Yeah.
And this is just incredible. Like I've already said before, we're having a lot of fun coming up with some new topics for our Patreon exclusive episodes.
Yeah.
The latest of which, actually, if you're enjoying this episode we're talking about today, we just released another from the more mysterious ancient history of Britain.
Yes.
And that was on the dreadful Hog Boy and this mysterious mound of Maze How.
Yeah.
So if you're digging on this whole like ancient British sort of theme that we've got going on here, then I definitely recommend checking out our Patreon page and seeing how you can support the show and get more of ITP.
Yeah, we would really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you so much to that list of amazing people that Amber just listed there. And yeah, I hope you guys are all enjoying that new episode we just put up. And yeah, if you guys haven't looked at our Patreon, the link is in the show notes. So click it and see what we do. And we would we appreciate the support so much. It's amazing. And you know what? And if you can't contribute on Patreon, it's all good, but leave us that 5-star review, click subscribe, tell someone about the show.
Exactly. Or come join us on the Facebook page even. That'd be fun. Love to have you on there.
All right, you want to get back into some witchcraft?
Yes. Okay, so witches in the area. So I think it should be important to cover more of the idea of like the history of witches in the area and some of the stories behind that, because one of the closest villages to these sites is that of Long Compton. So we've already mentioned this. The legend of the Kingstone plays into that. And as one might guess, this area around the Rollright Stones is full of legends and beliefs, many alluding to a dark past full of magic, witches, and mysterious witchcraft practices.
Yes.
Long Compton has been associated with witchcraft for many centuries. References date back to the Tudor times. Interestingly, even the witches in Shakespearean works may be based off of this tradition of witches found in Long Compton.
Yeah.
And things did get pretty dark here. And there was actually things that culminated with suspicions of locals that would grow into acts of violence and murder. And we've got a couple of stories here to speak to that.
Yeah.
The first of which occurred in September of 1875 CE, when an old woman in the Long Compton area by the name of Anne Turner, or Tennant alternatively, who is described as a defenseless 80-year-old, mind you, was stabbed to death with a pitchfork by, quote, a feeble-minded agricultural laborer by the name of James Haywood, who actually believed her to be the head of a local witch coven who had cursed him.
Right.
Haywood was of the belief that there were about 20 witches living in the area, quote, whose sorcery prevented him from carrying out his work in the fields. So again, this kind of brings to mind The Witch, the movie The Witch, I should say, just to clarify.
Yes.
Because it does kind of harken back to this idea of witchcraft having associations with the natural world, having powers over the natural world and of the people who are working it, right? Like the fields and stuff.
Yeah, like so this guy's driven insane, possibly. Like he's, right,
And it's not as if, like, he was the only one that was kind of the mind that this was a possibility, even though he was described by other local villagers in their testimony that you can actually read online. It's kind of cool. They've got the actual documents that have survived to date. But they described how he was obviously, kind of insane, but that there were the possibility of these things maybe existing in the area.
Right.
And this belief was still strong in the 20th century. And we have a next story here that dates to 1945, when another murder occurred. And this one was on Valentine's Day of all days.
Just to make it extra special.
And it involves another pitchfork, too, which is kind of interesting. So a laborer by the name of Charles Walton was found spiked to the ground with a pitchfork. And also with a cross carved into his chest and neck area.
Ooh.
This murder was never solved, although many locals suspected it was a ritual, something to do with witchcraft.
Yeah.
And there was no evidence ever produced besides the body itself found in the way that it was.
It's so weird. It's almost like maybe someone who wanted people to believe that there was witches in the area murdered him, carved the cross into him. Someone like a James, this last fellow here, the simpleton farmer.
Yeah, maybe. Or perhaps it was just a convenient way to sort of like scapegoat the like use witches as a scapegoat.
Just to murder someone.
Exactly.
Yeah, that too. That too. Yeah. Maybe getting two birds stoned at once. But, you really don't like witches. You don't like that guy either. Who knows?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's so many different like tales and legends in the area, though, and local lore. There was this other one that included the tale of Granny Faulkner, who was a woman allegedly able to transform herself into all sorts of different animals. So again, that brings to mind like Black Phillip.
Oh, yeah.
So like familiars, things like that too.
Definitely.
So yeah, it's kind of interesting.
The pitchfork element, you're right. Like
That's weird.
That definitely just has this overtone of a witchcraft story to it when there's someone killed with a pitchfork. Like that's just it's got this certain aesthetic to it, does it not? It's got this very historical, I don't even know. It's like a
It's just weird.
It is strange.
It's funny. It's almost comical to a certain degree. It's
it kind of is, right? I mean, like spiked to the ground.
Not to say like it is comical for anyone to be murdered.
No, of course not. I mean, the Granny Faulkner one is a little bit more vague and mysterious. The idea of a woman actually transforming into animals is a little spookier even than just like maybe some people being driven insane by the elder tree witch that's still maybe remaining in the landscape and like doing some dirty deeds type of thing. I mean, the interesting thing about Long Compton is that it was never really, like the central UK in this area was never a part of like the classic witch trials, like the 1700s, all that kind of stuff. It kind of like... It
did span that era, though. That was roughly the eras of the 15th to 18th centuries, and there are stories dating from around those times. Like,
from Long Compton?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
well, even the Tudor tradition, like I just mentioned, like that goes all the way back, and that's...
But it wasn't necessarily like a famous area for that. Like, I mean, I guess the whole British Isles were trying to root out witches because of... was it King Henry, I guess? Which one was that? That was like really into trying to root out witchcraft. We've mentioned it a million times.
Yeah.
We can come back to that later. If we wanted to get into a little bit more possible evidence of like an actual ancient witch that may or may not have had the ability to turn men into stone, there was an interesting site discovered in 2015. I think you pulled this up.
Yeah, well, we weren't sure if this was the same that was mentioned in the Mystic Britain episode, but there was actually a woman whose skeletal remains were unearthed in 2015. And she was actually buried with quite extensive like decoration, which means that she probably was quite an important person.
High status.
Yeah. Someone of high spiritual status is the kind of the quote there. But yeah, she was about 4 feet 11 inches tall, so quite small. And she was buried with what's known as like a bronze vessel, also referred to as a patera. And this is kind of referred to by archaeologists and researchers as possibly being used to present offerings to the gods. And it could have also been something that you like wash your hands with. Like, it's a very shallow vessel where things like wine or other sorts of things could have been placed.
Ceremonial type of vessel, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, she was also found with a large amber bead and then also some amethyst set in silver.
Yes.
Which is very fancy. So again, special care was taken to bury her. Interestingly, that patera, that bronze vessel, the shallow vessel thing, that's only the 5th one that's been discovered in Britain to date. So this was a very important object in ritual practices amongst the ancient peoples. She's been referred to as Rita. It's kind of her nickname now. And she was dated to about the 7th century AD is what I saw in a couple of articles that was written about her. But again, I don't know, I think that's rough. And she's also been referred to as a Saxon pagan Roll-Rite witch.
The Roll-Rite witch.
So is she the Roll-Rite witch that everyone's been searching for? I don't know. Maybe she's the one responsible for all this madness over the centuries.
Sure.
Who knows?
Up for debate.
Yes.
I mean, I think obviously people would want to point to that because it's the most... the strongest evidence of such a thing, because she was buried with these important ceremonial items where Obviously, if this is like a Saxon pagan high priestess of some kind or whatever, then there would have been some responsibilities she had knowledge-wise that others didn't. And
Almost like a shaman kind of character.
Very much like that.
Or figure, I should say.
Yeah. And it would have just timed out somewhat to the era where perhaps there would have been these Roman tribal chiefs that are calling themselves kings or wanting to be kings of a vastly more territory in the time of the Anglo-Saxons. So if this is a witch protecting her territory from another rival clan, like the story itself sounds so grandiose and crazy. But if you take out some of the terminology and it's more of like a high status shaman woman that's guarding the land that she's on from another warring clan, and some sort of magic takes place. Kings and queens and witches and these things are all very modern labels we're slapping on it. But perhaps there was some sort of event that took place.
Well, maybe she wasn't a witch. She was a guardian.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I mean. Yeah. These are all sort of the modern terms we're throwing on top.
You always see that in like TV shows and like, I'm thinking of like Game of Thrones and like that one that we love with Jason. What's that really cheesy?
Atlantis on BBC from like 2012 or
where
something.
You get the character of the high priestess that has powers, right, beyond the ordinary and is usually in the employ of someone that is either a lord or a king or someone that, is more politically based. And so maybe perhaps this woman was in the employ of another rival lord or king or whoever.
And of course, the association with the stones is not only that she, if we want to think of her as the witch and that turned them there, it's like she was found nearby. She was found right there. She was, not, it wasn't just off of the Saxon burial site that we mentioned earlier. It was like its own special separate thing. And it was right there at Roll-Rite. So it kind of makes sense. It wasn't just like hundreds of kilometers away or something like that. But of course, this is all, tying back into the circle as the most significant out of the monuments, because that's where the most, well, I shouldn't say that. There's some strangeness with the Kingstone that I'm going to talk about in a second, with it being a portal possibly for other creatures or entities, if you will. But there's definitely some legends about the circle itself that are just really fun. And yeah, just again, allude to this idea that there is an energy there that might be able to be tapped into. You want to call it bringing you good luck. You want to call it bringing you good health. It could be a number of different things. But the main thing that people do when they go to visit the Rollright Stones is try to count them. And like you mentioned off the top, it's really hard. And it's debated as to how many stones there actually are in the circle. But if you can count all the stones, legend has it that it's impossible to actually count the stones. Like you cannot. Like no one supposedly has ever gotten the same number. Exactly. But it's said that whoever will actually be able to count them 3 times over will essentially have their heart's desire, will have their heart's desire fulfilled. But it's really, really hard. There was a local baker who swore he could count them. And to prove it, he baked a number of loaves and placed them one for each stone and tried to count them that way. But each time he tried to collect them up, some of the loaves were missing. So again, this ties into some folklore that perhaps there was little fairies or some other entities that were preventing anyone from counting the same stone thrice over because they don't want anyone to tap into that magic.
Maybe it's the stones themselves.
Exactly. Maybe it's the stones themselves. Especially if they are petrified men. They're messing with people. And of course, Clive Anderson in the episode of Mystic Britain attempted this, like you said. It didn't turn out so well. I think he struggled on the second one. He was way off.
He was all over.
Way off.
Yeah, way off.
Things do get a little bit darker and just frankly more bizarre when we talk about legends about removing the stones. Yeah, some people were chipping off stuff, but there's a really, really, really strange legend here we pulled from the Roll-Rite Stone website. Their official website. Go ahead, Amber, because this one is really, really weird.
I think it's weird. It's not really dark though. It's just kind of interesting.
We're getting a little bit more towards that maybe.
Well, it does have this interesting magical connotation, and it kind of reminds me of the Easter Island stones, the Moai, and the idea that stones can move themselves.
Yes.
Or can prevent them from being moved, or they kind of have their own will, so to speak.
The mana.
The mana. But in this particular legend from the Rollright Stones website, it goes that a local farmer supposedly tried to take one of the largest stones to use as a bridge over a stream. And it actually took him 24 horses to drag the stone all the way down the hill. And the legend goes that there was a man that was killed along the way. So some pretty bad luck. Eventually, they did get the stone across the stream, but by the morning, it had flipped over onto the bank. Every day that they replaced it, they would go back to find it the exact same way.
Yep.
It refused to act as their bridge. And then, interestingly, their crops started to fail. This is when the farmers decided to, stop fighting the superstitions and put the stone back. It only took one horse, allegedly, to drag it back up the hill to where it belonged.
It was kicking and screaming that first time. It was pulling against those 24 horses.
Exactly.
That's pretty weird.
Yeah, that is a pretty interesting little story there. I liked that one a lot.
Yeah.
And it kind of gives the stones themselves personality, as opposed to the idea of magical sprites and fairies living amongst them. That's really cool too.
Absolutely.
But yeah, no, I love this idea of anthropomorphizing these stones.
Yeah, because you can believe because how would they be? Is it the petrified men that want to stay in their circle with the chance of potentially being turned back into a real boy, right? Like the Pinocchio.
Oh my gosh.
But I'm glad you mentioned fairies, because this is where I'm heading now, and I've been waiting to get to this because there's been legitimate claims by witnesses that have said they've seen creatures and strange happenings around the Rollright Stones. And not just the Rollright Stones, but across Europe in general. So the question here is could they represent not just petrified men, but perhaps other elemental creatures or spirits of the earth that were placed there by these ancient Neolithic peoples? You know what I mean? It's representative of the fairies. And burial mounds across the English Isles are thought to be this sort of entry point to perhaps an underworld, if you will, of elves, possibly even demons, depending on what site or what area you're looking at, familiars that come alive in popular imagination in books and things like that. I mean, it's definitely been played on in literature, but there might be something much more literal to it. For example, at the Rollright Stones, fairies have been seen allegedly, quote, dancing and then disappearing down a hole that's located right around the Kingstone, which is essentially implying that they are using this site of Neolithic significance, of energy, ley line point possibly, as a underground entry point to their other world, which, little woo-woo, but pretty awesome. Because there is this long-standing association between fairy-like creatures and megalithic structures across the British Isles. And fairies would be regarded as being more, this reminds me a little bit of when we talked about fairies in Iceland, I think, or elves in Iceland, where they build some of these ancient structures. So I think there's some association with the idea that perhaps the fairies helped people build these things, or they were placed there for a certain specific purpose that the earth was telling them to.
That's interesting. That reminds me again of the Menehune of Hawaii and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh, that's cool. I like that.
There have been other reports and legends that speak of tunnels that run between these ancient sites underground, and they're inhabited by these, quote, little people, the fairies, right? And in some stories that do get a little bit dark, there's humans that have been able to access them. So it's not so simple as you just walk around the Kingstone, there's a hole there, a rabbit hole, and you can go into the fairy world. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. You have to know how to look. Is sort of the idea, I think, right? But
I'm almost picturing it like the Princess and the Goblin, that sort of narrative, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where she ends up finding, almost like Alice in Wonderland-esque, where she ends up accidentally slipping through
That's
the
exactly what it's like. And accidentally is the optimal word, because there's legends that there's some humans who have accidentally entered into these places, and when they've found a way back out again, they emerge into their outside world and realize that time has been manipulated, which is sort of strange. It's as if they are really entering into a different dimension. So there's legends that people will find their way into one of these fairy tunnels and come out, and it's either days later or years have passed, or sometimes vice versa, where no time's passed at all, but they've felt they've been underground for days and days and days.
Weird.
So I love that, because it is this idea. And of course, we mentioned the idea of portal tomb, which is, of course, associated with Neolithic people's burial stuff. But now when we're bringing in the elements of the earth and possible little entities and creatures, it's maybe a little bit more than just that. There are some other really interesting ideas associated with these that I just have to list right now, because music and dancing is one that people genuinely think that the Circle of the King's Men may have been constructed for, a meeting place for celebration, singing and dancing. Well, that's also what people claim to be seeing the fairies do around some of these megalithic sites. So there's legit archaeologists saying that maybe this is what they were for. A celebration site to dance and try to like conjure things potentially.
Yeah.
And then people claim to see strange elemental beings dancing or doing exactly that outside of them. So I think that the circle is used for conjuring spirits of the earth. That's what I think it was for. There's been people that have claimed that, other locations across the UK, like Wicklow, the Wicklow Fairies are said to play their pipes at midnight and dance around the Hurl Stan in Northumberland. Just tossing that out there. I haven't talked to anyone or seen anything online with people recently claiming that they've seen fairies there, but maybe that's a thing. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that definitely kind of, it is all very tied into that rich sort of tradition. It does, again, I'm like thinking of like the witch was like, like remember that end scene where she ends up joining in with all of the other witches in the middle of the woods, and there's some really interesting, like obviously they're all in a circle too, and they're all chanting and yeah, exactly that, conjuring the spirits of the forest.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of
and just trying to tap into stuff. So I wanted to mention this. I told you this yesterday, which was just kind of funny. It's not just the idea of, being one with nature or whatever with these modern day druids going to the site, but genuinely like trying to use the stones for healing, for trying to reach a different portal, like a fairy world or whatever. This was a funny one. In 1743, there was a group of local women who believed that the stones could help their fertility. And specifically, they would go and rub their breasts on the Kingstone in an attempt to increase fertility. The king must have really been loving that. It's. I wonder if it actually worked. I wonder if anyone got pregnant three times over after that.
Did they have a control group? And then I want to see that experiment.
Perhaps they did. I'm not so sure. I mean, I've got some thoughts and theories and some weird stuff, but that's enough of me talking about fairies. Maybe we can head into some of our sort of final thoughts on this strange topic here.
Well, what? Yeah, exactly. What are your thoughts and theories on this? Could it be true in some way, or what can we just chalk up to pure folklore and just fun stories around the campfire?
And there's and there's sort of multiple angles of what we're dealing with here too, right? It's like, okay, why are the stones there? What are they for? Then we have the weird legends about the witch and some of the other side stuff that we're trying to prove.
Well, there's been so many layers of history and different traditions just kind of exactly that, layered on top of each other throughout time. And like we said right off the top of the bat, we don't even know originally what the function and the purpose was when these were originally built. We all have theories and ideas, and we've mentioned a few of those already, but again, it's all kind of up for grabs. And as different peoples move in and create their own culture and their own stories, like these Roll-Rite witch stories and things like that, it's just I don't know, who's to say what's what?
I do have
truth
a way.
Truth is whatever you feel. Like, you know what I mean? However you know what you know is your truth. You know what I mean? So
right. I do have a way of loosely trying to tie in the idea of like the portal tomb that you talked about into the idea of people literally seeing creatures and fairies and stuff. Because one of the theories is that the origins of these creatures, like, or entities, if you will, like a fairy, is that they represent the spirits of the ancestral dead of the land. So if these are portal tombs where people are being placed to get to a certain state and then they're transitioned elsewhere, perhaps what is seen later on is their spirit. They're the ghosts of these Neolithic people that I guess are coming back as a little bit more elemental beings. They're not just like ghosts like of the dead. They're now these fairy creatures.
You could interpret it too in that other way where it's like the people that are supposedly seeing these figures, these shadowy elemental figures or whatever, like maybe they're just seeing ghosts of the past, like whispers from the past or echoes, like we've referred to even from past episodes, like the Partridge Creek Monster, for example.
I like that, actually.
Something like that, right? Where it's just like, it is echoes of things that have just remained to a certain degree.
Right. I mean, I feel like I probably shouldn't even toss this out because this is very much not a UFO episode. But there's a few different fun little lists online of fun facts about the Rollright Stones, and this is one that didn't really get taken too far, but obviously people have talked about this with like Stonehenge and stuff like that, right? Like, are these ancient peoples trying to make these circles as some sort of a meeting point because you can see it from above, right?
I see.
So
Yeah.
in 1962, there was a story where allegedly a young farmer who was driving a tractor right along the edge there of Rollright in proximity to the stones saw a white pillar of light hovering 15 feet in the air before disappearing quickly. And he stated that he was so frightened that he sped home and didn't mention the incident until later. But this is added to this idea that perhaps Rollright, because this has happened at other stone circles across the UK and just in Europe in general. Maybe it was, the ancient alien guys would be loving this, that it's a meeting place or a marking point for something like that. I am not going that way.
No.
I am not leaning that way for this. There's not enough other evidence at all to suggest that in any way whatsoever. I'm more interested in the elemental beings of the earth, personally. That's my jam.
Yeah, I think that's probably a little bit more grounded interpretation.
Rather than just being like, it was for aliens. Yeah, no, I guess that's...
Well, I actually had some other examples that I wanted to bring up of different Neolithic structures that are quite impressive as well. And this is just a few little interest things here, but there is a burial chamber, and this is found in Wales, and it's called the St. Lython's Burial Chamber. And this is actually a single stone dolmen, and it was erected approximately 4000 BCE, but it's really interesting because, again, classic Flintstones house. It just looks like it's got the cute little roof on top. It's got the 3 sides, and it's like this like adorable little like open sort of area, enclosure sort of thing. And according to local legend, each Midsummer's Eve, the capstone is said to rotate 3 times, and all of the stones then go to the river for a dip.
So they're anthropomorphized again.
Cute?
It's like these,
I love that.
That is so, yeah, because it's like all of these things have some sort of like a life to them.
Yeah. There was another one that is dated to about the same era, 4000 BC. It's considered to be about 6,000 years old now. And it is one of the best preserved dolmens of Britain. So unlike the Kingstone, that's basically, Kingstone, the King's Men, who are kind of just all crumbling around each other. They don't really look like much now. This one is one of the best preserves. And it consists of an impressive 7 stones. 6 of them are upright, so vertically oriented. And there's 2 that kind of act as an entrance, so like 2 like almost like entrance pillars. And then there's a 3rd leaning across the entrance. And then there's an additional 3 vertically oriented ones that are holding up a massive 16-foot long capstone that's at a height of just over 8 feet. It's really cool.
That's massive.
I'm like kind of flabbergasted that Stonehenge kind of gets all the media attention and that all these other ones kind of just get thrown in the back. This one, I don't know if I even said the name. It's called Pentra Ifan.
Okay.
I'm probably just totally mispronouncing that, but I'm sorry. But that's the actual phonetic there. Interestingly, though, I will add this. This was a quote from BBC America. It says here, no bones have been found at this site, the one I just mentioned here, Pentra Ifan. Which is another reason, they say, why experts believe these constructions were a place to lay the dead before burial. So a transition zone. So I'm thinking, again, right, going back to the spiritual beliefs and things like that, the idea of laying these people in the land, almost so that maybe their spirit can be dispersed into the land.
Right.
Or connected to, again, that sort of portal, transition, transcendent zone where they, again, something's happening there, and obviously we don't really know what they were interpreting that as. But anyways, I thought that was really cool because, again, just going back to the idea of like, if you were an ancient person living in the landscape of Britain and you come across something like this, or you have a part in building one of these things, like just how powerful that would be. Right. And just to see it, and you'd probably be in awe of it just coming across it in the landscape itself. But just the idea of like a collective effort to make things like this come into existence is really interesting to me.
The amount of effort and the reason why, because the belief has to be so strong.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel like it's
the purpose.
Yeah, and it's not just as simple as, you know, simple people doing something because it means so much, even though it's really just it's just a structure. I do think, like we've mentioned this a million times, there's no way for me to quantify it, but that, you know, 6,000 years ago, when these things were first being constructed, there was just a completely different lens of viewing the earth and the world around you. And it wasn't just because of things they didn't know. It was because things they did know because of the exact moment in time where they were that we now are completely oblivious to.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where the witchcraft element of like ancient witches, which of course the story of the king and the witch is so much more modern.
Yeah.
Right? But I like the idea of it possibly being based on some sort of the idea of it being manipulated in a like ancient people manipulating it in a different way, right?
Like earth magic or something.
Yeah, you're talking like we're talking about these portal tombs as like this transition point and all this stuff. Perhaps there was people that were going to be using them for dirty deeds as well. You know what I mean? Right? Because they are these places of such significance.
Dirty deeds.
Dirty witchcraft, nastiness, you know what I'm saying? But of course, it is... it was sort of disappointing to find out that, the modern version, the story of the king and the witch, is really more of a late 18th century, 19th century creation. And there's actually other references where it's not even a witch, but a magician, rather, who actually turns the king and his army to stone, which immediately makes me think of Merlin.
Oh, yeah.
And sort of the early legends of Arthur and some of that weirdness in central UK as well.
Oh, yeah.
But again, there was definitely magic happening, whether or not it was the witch of ancient times or just a story in the 19th century. Something may have happened around the Rollright Stones that was very much similar. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of funny because even going back to the Kingstone legend and how he is an unnamed king, right?
Yeah.
And like we don't really know the era of like, when this supposed king might have been ruling or trying to rule or whatever. It was all kind of ambiguous.
Right.
But the idea of like, yeah, like this... not conflated with like say like things like the King Arthur tradition, but almost like another example of that kind of thing where it's like, yeah, now it's, who knows, like maybe like some sort of other king, mythical king that might have been even conflated at some point or another with the King Arthur tradition.
Right.
Maybe he was this guy that we're talking about today. Who knows? Like it's all just like fun and fable and lots of folklore, right? That's just, like I said before, peppered in, layered in over the centuries, and who knows how much of it obviously comes into play. The only thing that is the physical evidence is the stones themselves, right? Like, and then everything else is just hairy-fairy.
It kind of is. We can go there and see if we feel the energy of the stones, and you can make our wild interpretations. Well,
yeah, exactly. And I'm much more interested in the more ancient, like Neolithic side of it, and less about like, kind of it's really fun to talk about. I love the idea of like, these witches and fairies and that type of thing. It's all very, very fun. But for me, I just like get so much, my juices get flowing from like the idea of like the actual when these were constructed and who those people were. And all of that is just such a huge mystery still.
Absolutely. Well, you guys, we want to hear your thoughts and theories on the Rollright Stones, the story of the Rollright Witch, the idea of these megalithic structures being placed on sites of significance where perhaps there may be the ability to conjure up entities of the earth or just energies of the earth in general. There's sort of a lot going on with this, but you're right, Amber. I think the interest is centered on the people that place them there, and just how, oh man, just the feeling. It's like the hair is sort of standing up on the back of my neck, not for fear, but just thinking about it right now of just how weird it would have been to witness this because of the significance it had to these people.
And their motivations. And,
it's pretty special.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
Anyway, so hit us up, you guys. We want to hear what you have to say. Yeah. Comment on, we'll have a Facebook post coming out here, so hit us up on there. Leave a comment below. Come follow us.
Would you want to be the fly on the stone?
Ooh, the fly on the stone. That's right. Thank you for bringing that up again. That was the quote of the episode today. So come follow us on Facebook at Into the Portal Podcast, Instagram at Into the Portal Podcast. We're on Twitter at Into the Portal 1. We do have a TikTok account with no videos on it yet, but I think it's Into the Portal Podcast on TikTok. Yeah. Come follow us. Give us some motivation to start putting out some videos on there.
Please do.
And definitely hit up our website if you haven't before, you guys, intotheportal.com, where you can check out a little bit more about us and about the show. And leave us that 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. But as always, thank you so much to our Patreon supporters, to our producers, Adam Kellums, Kitsune,
Nightwing,
and all of our supporters on there. And for all of you guys out there listening, wherever you are in the world, hit us up if you're in some weird place, because we love to hear it. Into the portal mailbox at gmail.com. Mm-hmm. All right. Until next time on Into the Portal.
Your gateway to the bizarre.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.
Hello, beautiful. I'm Amy Errett, founder of Madison Reed, a hair color company I named after my daughter. Experience gorgeous, lasting, high-quality hair color made with ingredients you could feel good about, with consistent results every time. It's easy to find your perfect shade. Book a complimentary video hair color consultation with a licensed colorist on madison-reed.com and get 10% off plus free shipping on your first color kit. Use code RADIO10. That's code RADIO10.